Welcome to Tech with Kaushik. This is part 8 of our complete practice question series for the AZ-900 Microsoft Azure Fundamentals exam. Choose your answer before the timer ends. Then review the correct answer, detailed explanation, and exam tip. Let us begin part 8. Question number 275. The topic for this question is infrastructure as code. Here's what is happening. A development team frequently creates identical test environments containing Windows and Linux virtual machines. The team needs repeatable, standardized deployment with minimal manual effort. Solution: you use Azure Advisor recommendations to deploy the environments. Does this meet the goal? The choices are: Option A, yes. Option B, no. The answer here is option B, no. Here's why. Azure Advisor analyzes deployed resources and provides optimization recommendations. It does not define and deploy infrastructure. ARM templates or Bicep provide repeatable infrastructure as code deployments. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. A. Advisor recommendations do not automate creation of the required environments. Advisor recommends improvements, ARM templates, and Bicep declaratively deploy Azure resources. Here comes question number 276. An application uses resources into Azure Virtual Networks. The resources must communicate privately over the Microsoft backbone without using the public internet. Solution: you configure Azure Virtual Network peering between the two virtual networks. Does this meet the goal? Here are the options. Choice A, yes. Choice B, no. In this case, choose option A, yes. This is the best choice because virtual network peering connects Azure virtual networks so their resources can communicate privately through the Microsoft backbone. It avoids routing the traffic over the public internet. Now let's rule out the other options. B. Denying the solution is incorrect because private connectivity between Azure virtual networks is the core purpose of VNet peering. The main takeaway is peering connects Azure virtual networks directly. VPN gateway commonly connects Azure networks to external networks or remote clients. Let's continue with question number 277. Let's start with the scenario. Employees use several cloud applications. The company wants them to authenticate once and then access the applications without repeatedly entering their credentials. Solution: you configure Microsoft Entra Single Sign-On for the applications. Does this meet the goal? Let's compare the available options. Option A is yes. Option B is no. The best choice is option A, yes. Let's look at the reasoning. Single sign-on allows users to authenticate with one set of credentials and then access multiple connected applications without signing in separately to each one. The other choices do not work because B. Denying the solution is incorrect because the requirement directly describes single sign-on. A helpful shortcut is this. SSO improves user convenience and centralized access. MFA adds another verification factor to strengthen authentication. Next up is question number 278. Next, let's move into storage redundancy. Consider this situation. You are designing a disaster recovery strategy for a critical application that relies on Azure storage. The storage account must replicate its data to a secondary Azure region hundreds of miles away. Furthermore, the application must be able to actively query and read the data from the secondary region even while the primary region is fully operational. Which storage redundancy option meets these requirements? Choice A. Read Access Georedundant Storage, RAGRS. Choice B. Georedundant Storage, GRS. Choice C. Zone Redundant Storage, ZRS. Choice D. Locally Redundant Storage, LRS. Go with option A. Read Access Georedundant Storage, RAGRS. This works because standard georedundant storage, GRS, replicates data to a secondary region, but the secondary copy remains inaccessible unless Microsoft initiates a failover. Read Access Georedundant Storage, RAGRS, replicates the data to the secondary region and provides a secondary endpoint, allowing the application to actively read that data at any time. The remaining options can be eliminated because B. GRS replicates data geographically but does not allow read access to the secondary replica until a failover occurs. C. ZRS replicates data across 3 physical data centers within a single region, failing the geographic separation requirement. D. LRS keeps 3 copies of data within a single physical data center. Here's a useful exam tip. If an application needs to read data from 2 different regions simultaneously for load balancing or reporting, it requires RAGRS or RAGZRS. Let's focus on question number 279. The key situation is this. An organization is migrating workloads to Azure. They design their architecture across multiple data centers so that if one physical facility loses power, the application continues to run without interruption from another facility. Which cloud benefit does this architecture primarily demonstrate? Watch the differences between these options. Now examine choice A, high availability. Now examine choice B, elasticity. Now examine choice C, scalability. Now examine choice D, low latency. The right response is option A, high availability. High availability ensures that an application remains operational and accessible even if a component, like a server rack or an entire physical data center, fails. By architecting across multiple data centers, using availability zones, the system is highly available and fault-tolerant. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. B. Elasticity is the ability to automatically scale resources up or down based on demand, not survive a failure. C. Scalability is the ability to handle increased load by adding more power or instances. D. Low latency refers to the speed at which data travels over the network, ensuring a fast user experience. Keep this point in mind for the exam. Fault tolerance is a design characteristic that enables high availability during hardware failures. Let's work through question number 280. Here's the situation to consider. A local business is evaluating cloud models to host a new e-commerce platform. They are considering a public cloud deployment. Which 2 characteristics are defining features of a public cloud? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. You need to identify 2 correct options. Here are the possible answers. Choice A, self-service provisioning and management. Choice B, consumption-based metered pricing. Choice C, hardware infrastructure exclusively dedicated to a single tenant. Choice D, physical hardware maintenance managed by the customer. Choice E, total disconnection from the public internet. The correct answers are option A, self-service provisioning and management, and option B, consumption-based metered pricing. The main reason is the public cloud model allows customers to provision resources on demand via a self-service portal, like the Azure portal, without human intervention from the provider. It also operates on an operational expenditure, OPEX, model, meaning customers are billed using metered pricing only for what they consume. C. Public clouds use a multi-tenant model where physical hardware is shared among many customers, not dedicated to one. D. The cloud provider, Microsoft, maintains the physical hardware in a public cloud, not the customer. E. Public clouds are accessible over the public internet, whereas private clouds are often disconnected or accessed only via private VPNs. Exam tip. Multi-tenancy and self-service are the hallmarks of the public cloud, allowing massive economies of scale. Here's an important one. Question number 281. This situation sets up the main requirement. A retail company hosts a web application that experiences minimal traffic during most of the year but encounters massive, unpredictable spikes in traffic during holiday sales events. Which cloud computing benefit allows the application to automatically add compute resources during the sales events and remove them afterward to minimize costs? Focus on what separates these choices. Option A. Elasticity. Option B. High availability. Option C. Disaster recovery. Option D. Predictability. Go with option A. Elasticity. Here's why. Elasticity is the ability of a cloud system to automatically expand, scale out, to handle sudden spikes in traffic and then automatically contract, scale in, when the traffic subsides. This dynamic scaling ensures performance during peak times and minimizes costs during quiet times. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. B. High availability ensures the system stays online during hardware failures, but it does not dictate dynamic capacity adjustments for cost savings. C. Disaster recovery is the process of restoring services after a catastrophic regional failure. D. Predictability refers to consistent performance and cost expectations, not the dynamic scaling mechanism itself. Scalability is the manual or planned addition of resources. Elasticity is the automated, rapid scaling of resources in response to real-time metrics. Now for question number 282. Here's the scenario. An organization currently hosts 100 servers in its on-premises data center. The data center is at maximum capacity, but the organization occasionally requires extra compute power for short-term data processing tasks. The organization wants to avoid purchasing new physical servers while maintaining its existing on-premises infrastructure. Which cloud deployment model should the organization adopt? Review the options. Option A. Hybrid cloud. Option B. Private cloud. Option C. Sovereign cloud. Option D. Multi-cloud. The answer here is option A. Hybrid cloud. This is the best choice because a hybrid cloud architecture combines an organization's existing on-premises private cloud with a public cloud. This allows the organization to keep its existing 100 servers running locally while using Azure to burst and provide extra compute power only when needed, avoiding large capital investments in new hardware. Now let's rule out the other options. B. A private cloud would require purchasing new physical hardware for the on-premises data center, generating massive capex. C. Sovereign clouds are isolated public clouds for government use and do not inherently address the on-premises capacity problem. D. Multi-cloud involves using multiple public providers, for example, Azure and AWS, and does not describe the integration of on-premises resources. The main takeaway is cloud bursting is a classic hybrid cloud scenario where an application runs on-premises but bursts into the public cloud when demand spikes. Question number 283. Let's go. The focus now shifts to Azure pricing calculator. A company is comparing to proposed Azure architectures before deployment. It needs an estimate based on selected services, regions, configurations, and expected usage. Which tool should the company use? Option A, Azure Pricing Calculator. Option B, Azure Cost Management Budget Alerts. Option C, Azure Advisor. Option D, Azure Policy. In this case, choose option A, Azure Pricing Calculator. Let's look at the reasoning. The Azure Pricing Calculator estimates the expected cost of planned Azure services and supports comparison of different configurations before resources are deployed. The other choices do not work because B, budget alerts monitor spending thresholds after costs exist. C, Azure Advisor recommends improvements for deployed resources. D, Azure Policy enforces governance rules and does not estimate costs. A helpful shortcut is this. Use the pricing calculator for what-if estimates and cost management for actual and forecasted spending. Next up is question number 284. Consider this situation. An organization wants to identify idle or underutilized Azure resources and receive recommendations that can reduce the cost of its existing deployment. Which Azure service should the organization use? Review the options. Option A, Azure Advisor. Option B, Azure Pricing Calculator. Option C, Azure Policy. Option D, Microsoft Purview. The best choice is option A, Azure Advisor. This works because Azure Advisor analyzes deployed resources and provides cost recommendations, including actions for idle or underutilized resources. The remaining options can be eliminated because B, the pricing calculator estimates planned costs before deployment. C, Azure Policy enforces governance requirements. D, Microsoft Purview supports data governance and compliance. Here's a useful exam tip. Advisor recommends optimizations, cost management tracks spending, the pricing calculator estimates future deployments. Now let's examine question number 285. We are moving on to Defender for Cloud. Take a moment to review this scenario. A security team is evaluating Microsoft Defender for Cloud. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Now check statement 1. Microsoft Defender for Cloud provides security posture recommendations for Azure resources. Now check statement 2. Microsoft Defender for Cloud is the directory service used to authenticate users to Azure. Now check statement 3. Microsoft Defender for Cloud can help assess cloud resources against security standards. The answer here is yes. Defender for Cloud assesses resources and recommends actions that improve security posture. The answer here is no. Microsoft Entra ID provides directory and authentication services. The answer here is yes. Its posture management capabilities evaluate resources against security policies and standards. Keep this point in mind for the exam. Defender for Cloud secures and assesses workloads. Microsoft Entra ID authenticates identities. Question number 286. Here's the scenario. An organization is selecting Azure tools for security posture, governance, and monitoring. Match each requirement to the Azure service that provides the capability. The left column contains left item 1, assess cloud security posture and provide a secure score and recommendations. Left item 2, enforce organizational standards such as allowed deployment locations. Left item 3, collect metrics and logs and create operational alerts. The right column contains. Choice A on the right is Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Choice B on the right is Azure Policy. Choice C on the right is Azure Monitor. Let's review the completed pairs. Match assess cloud security posture and provide a secure score and recommendations with A. Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Match enforce organizational standards such as allowed deployment locations with B. Azure Policy. Match collect metrics and logs and create operational alerts with C. Azure Monitor. Defender for Cloud evaluates security posture, Azure Policy enforces governance rules, and Azure Monitor collects telemetry and supports alerts. Exam tip. Defender for Cloud improves security posture, Azure Policy enforces standards, and Azure Monitor observes resource health and performance. Question number 287 brings in a useful concept. Let's focus on the following scenario. An organization is adopting a new customer relationship management (CRM) tool delivered as software as a service (SaaS). Under the shared responsibility model, what is the customer primarily responsible for providing and managing in a SaaS environment? Focus on what separates these choices. Now examine choice A, application code and software updates. Now examine choice B, physical data center security. Now examine choice C, compute and network resources. Now examine choice D, application data and identities. The right response is option D, application data and identities. The main reason is in SaaS, the provider manages the application and underlying infrastructure. The customer remains responsible for its data, identities, access settings, and endpoints. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. A. The SaaS provider manages the application code and software updates. B. The provider is responsible for physical data center security. C. The provider manages the underlying compute and networking infrastructure. Across IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, customers always retain responsibility for their data and identities. Question number 288. Scenario. A company needs an encrypted connection between its on-premises network and an Azure virtual network. The connection can travel over the public internet. Which Azure service should the company use? Choices. Option A, Azure VPN Gateway. Option B, Azure Express Route. Option C, Virtual Network Peering. Option D, Azure DNS. Go with option A, Azure VPN Gateway. Here's why. Azure VPN Gateway connects an on-premises network to an Azure virtual network through an encrypted tunnel over the public internet. B. ExpressRoute provides private connectivity that does not travel over the public internet. C. Virtual Network Peering connects Azure virtual networks. D. Azure DNS hosts and resolves DNS domains. The main takeaway is VPN Gateway uses encrypted internet connectivity, ExpressRoute provides private dedicated connectivity. Let's take a look at question number 289. This question takes us into Microsoft Purview. First, let's review the situation. A data governance team needs to discover and classify sensitive information across the organization's data estate. Select the appropriate service to complete the sentence. For the first statement, the organization should use the blank to discover, classify, and govern data across multiple sources. Choose between 1. Microsoft Purview, Azure Policy, Azure Monitor, or Azure Cost Management. The answer for statement 1 is Microsoft Purview. Purview provides a unified data governance experience. A helpful shortcut is this. Use Microsoft Purview for data governance. Use Azure policy to enforce rules on Azure resources. Next, question number 290. An IT manager is comparing cloud service models. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. The first statement says, Azure virtual machines are an infrastructure as a service, IaaS, offering because customers manage the guest operating system. The second statement says, Azure App Service is a platform as a service, PaaS, offering because Microsoft manages the underlying operating system and infrastructure. The third statement says, Microsoft 365 is an infrastructure as a service, IaaS, offering because customers manage the servers that run the applications. The first statement is yes. In IaaS, the customer manages the guest operating system and applications. The second statement is yes. PaaS lets the customer focus on application code while Microsoft manages the platform. The third statement is no. Microsoft 365 is SaaS. Microsoft manages the application and infrastructure. Here's a useful exam tip. IaaS gives OS control, PaaS gives an application platform, and SaaS delivers a complete application. Let's continue with question number 291. We are moving on to Azure Storage. Here's the situation to consider. A company is selecting Azure Storage services for different data types. Match each requirement to the appropriate Azure Storage service. Here are the items on the left. Item 1 on the left is stores unstructured object data such as images, video, and backups. Item 2 on the left is provides managed file shares that can be accessed by using SMB or NFS. Item 3 on the left is stores messages for asynchronous processing between application components. Choose from these right side options. Right side choice A, Azure Blob Storage. Right side choice B, Azure Files. Right side choice C, Azure Queue Storage. The matches work out like this. Pair stores unstructured object data such as images, video, and backups and A, Azure Blob Storage. Pair provides managed file shares that can be accessed by using SMB or NFS and B, Azure Files. Pair stores messages for asynchronous processing between application components and C, Azure Queue Storage. This is the best choice because Blob Storage is for object data, Azure Files provides managed file shares, and Queue Storage stores messages for decoupled application processing. Keep this point in mind for the exam. Choose Blob Storage for objects, Azure Files for shared files, and Queue Storage for application messages. Let's take a look at question number 292. Let's start with the scenario. Your organization manages 100 Windows devices. You must enforce a policy that prevents users from authenticating to Microsoft 365 or Azure applications unless their device is marked as compliant and has the latest security updates. Which Microsoft Entra feature should you implement to enforce this access control? Now let's review the options. Choice A, Azure Firewall. Choice B, Microsoft Entra Conditional Access. Choice C, Azure Policy. Choice D, Microsoft Defender for Cloud. The best choice is option B, Microsoft Entra Conditional Access. Let's look at the reasoning. Microsoft Entra Conditional Access acts as an intelligent decision engine. It evaluates signals, such as device compliance state, user location, and risk to enforce organizational policies. If a device is not marked as compliant by an MDM like Intune, conditional access will block the authentication attempt. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. A. Azure Firewall controls network traffic at the VNet boundary. It does not evaluate device compliance or Entra-ID authentication. C. Azure policy governs Azure resource configurations, not user identity or endpoint access. D. Defender for Cloud provides workload protection, not identity-based access control. Exam tip. Conditional access bridges the gap between identity, Entra-ID, and device management, Intune, to enforce zero trust access. Now let's examine question number 293. Next, let's move into public cloud. Take a moment to review this scenario. A business analyst is researching the fundamental characteristics of cloud computing. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Cloud computing provides the ability to automatically scale resources out or in based on demand. Statement 2. By migrating workloads to a public cloud, an organization can shift from an operational expenditure (OPEX) model to a capital expenditure (CAPEX) model. Statement 3. Public cloud providers use virtualization technologies to securely share physical hardware resources among multiple independent customers. Statement 1 should be marked yes. Automatically adding and removing capacity based on demand is elasticity. Statement 2 should be marked no. Public cloud consumption usually shifts spending from CAPEX toward OPEX. Statement 3 should be marked yes. Virtualization enables secure multi-tenancy on shared provider infrastructure. Public cloud commonly combines multi-tenancy, self-service access, elasticity, and consumption-based pricing. Let's work through question number 294. First, let's review the situation. A developer needs a compute option that executes short code in response to events and scales automatically. Select the appropriate Azure service to complete the sentence. Now look at statement 1. The blank runs event-triggered code without requiring the customer to manage servers. Your choices are 1. Azure Functions, Azure Virtual Machines, Azure Virtual Desktop, or Azure Blob Storage. Statement 1 should be completed with Azure Functions. Functions is designed for event-driven, serverless execution. The main takeaway is use functions for event-driven code, virtual machines for guest OS control, and containers for portable packaged applications. Here comes question number 295. The focus now shifts to single sign-on. Here's what is happening. An organization wants employees to access many cloud applications with one set of credentials. Select the appropriate service to complete the sentence. Statement 1. The blank is the centralized identity provider that enables users to authenticate once and access multiple applications using single sign-on, SSO. Pick from 1. Microsoft Entra ID, Azure Key Vault, Microsoft Defender for Cloud, or Azure Application Gateway. The first statement uses Microsoft Entra ID. Entra ID acts as the identity provider for Azure, Microsoft 365, and many SaaS applications. A helpful shortcut is this. SSO lets users authenticate once and access multiple authorized applications without repeatedly entering credentials. Question number 296. Needs a little extra thought. Pay close attention to what the scenario really requires. A security architect is mapping Azure security controls to the Defense in-depth model. Select the appropriate layer to complete the sentence. The first one reads, in the Defense in-depth architecture, Azure DDoS protection mitigates volumetric network attacks and is implemented at the blank. For this one, the options are 1. Perimeter layer, application layer, compute layer, or identity layer. For statement 1, choose perimeter layer. DDoS protection is a perimeter control against external volumetric attacks. Here's a useful exam tip. Defense in-depth uses multiple layers so that failure of one control does not expose the entire environment. Let's work through question number 297. Here's the situation to consider. An organization wants to reduce the risk that a stolen password alone can be used to access cloud applications. Solution: you require Microsoft Entra Multi-Factor Authentication, MFA, for user sign-ins. Does this meet the goal? Take a look at each choice. Option A is yes. Option B is no. The answer here is option A, yes. This works because MFA requires an additional verification factor beyond the password, so possession of a stolen password alone is insufficient for signing. Now let's rule out the other options. B. MFA directly addresses the requirement by adding another authentication factor. Keep this point in mind for the exam. Authentication factors include something you know, something you have, and something you are. Now let's examine question number 298. First, let's review the situation. A company is comparing Azure sovereign cloud environments. Match each sovereign cloud to its defining characteristic. Let's begin with the left side. Left side choice 1, Azure Government. Left side choice 2, Azure China. Now look at the choices on the right. Right option A, a physically separated cloud for eligible United States government organizations and partners. Right option B, a physically separated cloud in China operated by 21 ViaNet. Right option C, a standard public Azure region available to any customer. Here are the correct matches. Azure Government goes with A. A physically separated cloud for eligible United States government organizations and partners. Azure China goes with B. A physically separated cloud in China operated by 21 ViaNet. Azure Government serves eligible US government workloads in a separated environment, while Azure China is a physically separated cloud operated by 21 ViaNet. Exam tip. Sovereign clouds are isolated environments designed to meet specific national or governmental requirements. Let's continue with question number 299. This question takes us into shared responsibility. Let's start with the scenario. A company manages its own on-premises servers. They plan to lift and shift these servers directly to Azure Virtual Machines, an IaaS model. Which two administrative responsibilities will the company no longer need to perform after migrating to Azure Virtual Machines? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. Select exactly two answers. Now let's review the options. Option A is replacing failed physical hard drives and server motherboards. Option B is securing physical access to the data center building. Option C is installing security patches for the Windows operating system. Option D is backing up the application databases. Option E is managing user permissions for shared network folders. The answers that work here are option A, replacing failed physical hard drives and server motherboards, and option B, securing physical access to the data center building. The main reason is Azure Virtual Machines provide infrastructure as a service, IaaS. In an IaaS model, the cloud provider, Microsoft, handles all physical responsibilities, including physical data center security, power, cooling, and replacing failed hardware components. The other choices do not work because C. In IaaS, the customer remains fully responsible for patching the guest operating system, Windows Linux. D. The customer is responsible for configuring and managing backups for their data inside the VM. E. The customer must manage identities and file permissions within the VM. The defining characteristic of IaaS is that the provider manages the physical hardware, but the customer manages the operating system and everything above it. Here's an important one, question number 300. This situation sets up the main requirement. A company is selecting Azure tools for planning and optimizing cloud spending. Match each cost management requirement to the appropriate Azure tool. First, review these entries. Item 1 on the left is estimate the expected monthly cost of a planned Azure deployment. Item 2 on the left is analyze actual spending, create budgets, and configure cost alerts. Item 3 on the left is receive recommendations to reduce costs for existing Azure resources. Here are the possible matches. Choice A on the right is Azure pricing calculator. Choice B on the right is Azure cost management. Choice C on the right is Azure advisor. Choice D on the right is Azure policy. Use these pairings. The correct match for estimate the expected monthly cost of a planned Azure deployment is A. Azure pricing calculator. The correct match for analyze actual spending, create budgets, and configure cost alerts is B. Azure cost management. The correct match for receive recommendations to reduce costs for existing Azure resources is C. Azure advisor. Here's why. The pricing calculator estimates planned costs, cost management analyzes actual spending and budgets, and advisor recommends optimizations for deployed resources. The main takeaway is estimate before deployment with the pricing calculator, monitor after deployment with cost management, and optimize with advisor. Let's take a look at question number 301. Take a moment to review this scenario. Your organization has just signed up for Microsoft Azure and wants to start deploying virtual networks and virtual machines. What is the foundational prerequisite boundary you must create in Azure before you can provision any billable resources? Take a look at each choice. Choice A, an Azure subscription. Choice B, a management group. Choice C, a resource group. Choice D, a virtual network. In this case, choose option A. An Azure subscription. This is the best choice because an Azure subscription is the fundamental logical container and billing boundary required before any resources can be deployed. You cannot create a resource group, virtual network, or virtual machine without first having an active subscription to build those resources against. The remaining options can be eliminated because B. Management groups organize subscriptions, so a subscription must exist first or be created implicitly. C. A resource group requires a subscription to exist. D. A virtual network requires a resource group, which requires a subscription. A helpful shortcut is this. The hierarchy is management group leads to subscription leads to resource group leads to resource. You must have a subscription to hold resources. Let's work through question number 302. First, let's review the situation. An organization protects its cloud environment with multiple independent security layers so that another layer can continue protecting resources if one control fails. Which security model does this describe? Let's compare the available options. Choice A, Defense in Depth. Choice B, Single Sign-On. Choice C, Role-Based Access Control. Choice D, Consumption-Based Pricing. The right response is option A, Defense in Depth. Let's look at the reasoning. Defense in Depth uses multiple layers of security across areas such as identity, network, compute, applications, and data. A failure in one layer does not remove all protection. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. B. Single sign-on lets a user authenticate once to access multiple applications. C. RBAC controls permissions based on assigned roles. D. Consumption-based pricing is a cloud cost model. Here's a useful exam tip. Defense in Depth uses several security layers instead of relying on one control. Let's focus on question number 303. We are moving on to application hosting. The key situation is this. A company wants to host a custom web application in Azure while avoiding management of the underlying operating system and web server infrastructure. Which Azure application hosting option best meets the requirement? Watch the differences between these options. Option A, Azure App Service. Option B, Azure Virtual Machines. Option C, Azure Virtual Desktop. Option D, Azure Express Route. The right response is option A, Azure App Service. This works because Azure App Service is a managed platform for hosting web applications. Microsoft manages the underlying infrastructure and operating system. B. Virtual machines require the customer to manage the guest operating system. C. Azure Virtual Desktop delivers virtual desktops and applications to users. D. ExpressRoute provides private network connectivity to Azure. Keep this point in mind for the exam. Choose App Service for managed web hosting and virtual machines when full guest OS control is required. See how you handle question number 304. Look for the most important clue in this scenario. An organization requires every new Azure resource to comply with standards such as approved locations and mandatory tags. Which Azure governance service should the organization use to evaluate and enforce these standards? Use the details in the question to eliminate options. Consider option A, Azure Policy. Consider option B, Resource Logs. Consider option C, Azure Advisor. Consider option D, Azure Service Health. Go with option A, Azure Policy. Azure Policy evaluates resources against defined rules and can deny or remediate deployments that do not meet organizational standards. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. B. Resource logs protect resources from deletion or modification but do not enforce configuration standards. C. Azure Advisor provides optimization recommendations rather than enforcing rules. D. Azure Service Health reports service issues and planned maintenance. Exam tip. Use Azure Policy to control what configurations are allowed. Use RBAC to control who can perform actions. Take a careful look at question number 305. Before choosing, identify the key constraint. A financial controller is using Azure Cost Management to analyze cloud spending. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. The first statement says, Azure Cost Management can aggregate and display costs for subscriptions organized under a management group. The second statement says, Azure Cost Management can break down and filter cloud spending by individual resource groups. The third statement says, Azure Cost Management can display historical spending trends for individual Azure resources. For statement 1, choose yes. Management group scope can aggregate cost data from included subscriptions. For statement 2, choose yes. Cost analysis can filter and group spending by resource group. For statement 3, choose yes. Historical cost data can be analyzed for individual resources. Cost management provides spending visibility and budgets. Azure Advisor provides optimization recommendations. Question number 306 brings in a useful concept. This question takes us into storage access tiers. Let's focus on the following scenario. A storage administrator is selecting access tiers for blob data. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Now check statement 1. The archive access tier can be applied as the default access tier at the storage account level. Now check statement 2. The hot access tier has higher storage costs but lower access costs, making it suitable for frequently accessed data. Now check statement 3. The cool access tier is the best tier for data that is expected to remain unused for several years. Statement 1 should be marked no. The account default can be hot, cool, or cold. Archive is set at the blob level. Statement 2 should be marked yes. Hot has higher storage cost but lower access cost for frequently used data. Statement 3 should be marked no. Archive is generally more appropriate for data that is rarely accessed for years. The main takeaway is as access frequency decreases, storage cost generally falls while retrieval cost and latency increase. Let's continue with question number 307. Let's start with the scenario. An organization wants applications in a virtual network to access an Azure platform service without using the service's public endpoint. Select the appropriate networking feature to complete the sentence. For the first statement, the blank assigns a private IP address from a virtual network to an Azure service so traffic can remain on the Microsoft network. Choose between 1. Private endpoint, public endpoint, VPN gateway, or express route. The answer for statement 1 is private endpoint. Private endpoints provide private IP-based access to supported Azure services. A helpful shortcut is this. Public endpoints are internet reachable. Private endpoints place service access on a private virtual network address. Take a careful look at question number 308. The focus now shifts to Microsoft Entra ID. Look for the most important clue in this scenario. An identity architect is comparing Microsoft Entra identity capabilities. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Microsoft Entra ID is a cloud-based identity and access management service. Statement 2. Microsoft Entra Domain Services provides managed domain services such as Domain Join, LDAP, and Kerberos without requiring customers to manage domain controllers. Statement 3. Microsoft Entra External ID requires guest users to be created as internal employee accounts before they can access shared applications. For statement 1, choose yes. Entra ID manages identities and access to cloud resources and applications. For statement 2, choose yes. Entra Domain Services supplies managed domain features without customer-managed domain controllers. For statement 3, choose no. External users can use supported external identities rather than becoming internal employees. Here's a useful exam tip. Entra ID manages cloud identities. Entra Domain Services adds managed domain capabilities. External ID supports outside users. Let's focus on question number 309. The key situation is this. An access request originates from a device on the corporate network. Which zero trust principle requires the organization to authenticate and authorize the request using all available signals rather than trusting it solely because of its network location? Focus on what separates these choices. Now examine choice A, verify explicitly. Now examine choice B, assume all internal traffic is trusted. Now examine choice C, provide permanent administrator access. Now examine choice D, use a single perimeter security control. The best choice is option A, verify explicitly. The main reason is zero trust requires every access request to be explicitly authenticated and authorized using signals such as identity, device, location, and risk. Now let's rule out the other options. B. Zero trust does not automatically trust traffic based on network location. C. Zero trust favors least privilege and just-in-time access, not permanent broad access. D. Zero trust uses layered controls rather than relying on one perimeter. Keep this point in mind for the exam. Zero trust follows three principles: verify explicitly, use least privilege, and assume breach. Now for question number 310. Next, let's move into Azure policy. Your organization mandates that no cloud resources can be provisioned outside of the Europe geographic boundary to comply with data residency laws. Which Azure service should you use to automatically enforce this location restriction across your entire subscription? Choice A, Azure policy. Choice B, resource locks. Choice C, management groups. Choice D, Azure reservations. The answer here is option A, Azure policy. Here's why. Azure policy is a governance service used to create, assign, and manage policies. By assigning the allowed locations policy, you can automatically deny the creation of any resource that attempts to deploy to a region outside of Europe. The other choices do not work because B. Resource locks prevent deletion or modification. They do not restrict geographic deployment. C. Management groups provide a hierarchy to assign policies, but they do not enforce rules natively without an attached policy. D. Reservations provide billing discounts. Exam tip. If a question asks how to enforce rules, restrict resource sizes, or enforce tagging, the answer is almost always Azure policy. Let's take a look at question number 311. Here's the situation to consider. A security team wants a service that identifies security weaknesses across its cloud resources. Select the appropriate service to complete the sentence. Now look at statement 1. The blank evaluates the security posture of Azure resources and provides a secure score and recommendations. For this one, the options are 1. Microsoft Defender for Cloud, Azure Service Health, Azure Cost Management, or Azure Monitor. Statement 1 should be completed with Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Defender for Cloud assesses security posture and recommends improvements. Defender for Cloud focuses on security posture. Azure Monitor focuses on operational telemetry. Now let's examine question number 312. Next, let's move into Azure Pricing Calculator. Take a moment to review this scenario. A company is planning an Azure deployment and wants to estimate its expected monthly cost before creating any resources. Which Azure tool should the company use? Here are the possible answers. Option A is Azure Pricing Calculator. Option B is Azure Cost Management. Option C is Azure Advisor. Option D is Azure Policy. In this case, choose option A, Azure Pricing Calculator. This is the best choice because the Azure Pricing Calculator converts anticipated service usage and configuration choices into an estimated Azure cost before deployment. The remaining options can be eliminated because B, Cost Management analyzes actual and forecasted spending after resources are in use. C, Azure Advisor recommends ways to optimize existing deployments. D, Azure Policy enforces governance standards. The main takeaway is use the pricing calculator before deployment and cost management after deployment. Here comes question number 313. Here's the scenario. An application uses a web tier and a database tier in the same Azure virtual network. The organization wants to place the tiers in separate IP address ranges. Which virtual network component should be used to divide the address space? The choices are Option A, Subnets. Option B, Virtual Network Peering. Option C, Azure DNS. Option D, ExpressRoute. The right response is option A, Subnets. Let's look at the reasoning. Subnets divide a virtual network's address space into smaller logical segments so resources can be organized by tier or function. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. B, peering connects separate virtual networks. C, Azure DNS hosts and resolves DNS domains. D, ExpressRoute provides private connectivity from an external network to Microsoft Cloud services. A helpful shortcut is this. A virtual network provides the private address space. Subnets divide that space into logical segments. Next up is question number 314. This question takes us into Microsoft Purview. Consider this situation. A company needs to discover where sensitive data is stored, classify it, and understand how it moves across the data estate. Which Microsoft service is designed for this data governance requirement? Here are the options. Choice A, Microsoft Purview. Choice B, Azure Policy. Choice C, Azure Monitor. Choice D, Azure Advisor. Go with option A, Microsoft Purview. This works because Microsoft Purview provides unified data governance capabilities, including data discovery, classification, cataloging, and lineage. B, Azure Policy governs Azure resource configurations. C, Azure Monitor collects and analyzes operational telemetry. D, Azure Advisor provides optimization recommendations. Here's a useful exam tip. Purview governs data, Azure Policy governs resource configurations. Question number 315. Here's what is happening. A cloud architect is reviewing Azure availability zone concepts. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. The first statement says, availability zones are supported in every Azure region. The second statement says, availability zones can host only virtual machines running Windows Server. The third statement says, availability zones provide physically separate groups of data centers within a single Azure region. The answer here is no. Availability zone support varies by Azure region. The answer here is no. Zones support Windows, Linux, and many platform services. The answer here is yes. Each zone consists of one or more physically separate data centers within a region. Keep this point in mind for the exam. Availability zones protect against data center failures within a region. Multiple regions protect against regional failures. You have completed part 8 of the AZ-900 practice question series. Continue your preparation by opening the complete playlist and watching the remaining parts in sequence. Please like this video, subscribe to Tech with Kaushik, and enable notifications for more cloud certification exam preparation content. Share your score, questions, or feedback in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you in the next part.